This is Anarchast.
Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet from Acapulco, Mexico. I'm Jeff Berwick. I have from Bristol in the UK, Ben Lowrey. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great, Jeff. It's wonderful to speak to you. How are you?
It's very nice to speak to you too. I came across your videos a while ago on the internet, and I saw you were talking to Stefan Molyneux, and I really liked your attitude. You're very excited about voluntarism, anarchism, and it's great to see, and it's nice to see some young people really get into it. And so I wanted to have you on the show and talk a little bit about how you feel about it. I know you've recently just got into it, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into anarchy?
Sure. Well, I guess I really started off, the first thing I came across was the free man on the land movement and the kind of sovereignty movement. Some people call it the sovereign citizen movement. And that was my first exposure, really, to the idea of freedom and liberty and questioning authority. And that was around about 2009. But it was kind of frustrating because, I find it didn't really work for me. A lot of the theories were trying to beat the system at its own game, trying to win court cases, trying to beat criminal charges, trying to beat banks, and from my perspective, it just didn't really work. But then I slowly started to discover, more of the libertarian and the Stefan Molyneux voluntarism stuff on YouTube, and for the first time it made perfect sense. It was a much better explanation of the way the world is, and when I heard Stefan explain the non-aggression principle, and when I heard him distinguish between violent and voluntary interaction, all of a sudden it made sense. We're not governed by consent, we're governed by guns, right? The government don't represent us, they force us to do as we're told. So since then, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about anarcho-capitalism, etc.
And so how long ago was that you've gone through this sort of evolution, just over the last year or so?
Yeah, just over the last 12 months, really. I think it was only about 12 months, around about 2011 that I first, really started listening to Stefan Molyneux. And since then, I've just been really focusing on it as much as possible.
That's great. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on what you were saying. I've never thought to try to beat the system. I've always just tried to avoid the system, and I never even before I even knew what anarchy was, I just knew I didn't want any part of this thing. These people want me to pay all kinds of things. They want me to do all kinds of things, or they want to force me to do all these things, and I just didn't like it. And I always just found ways to work in the free market, which is actually called a black market, but it's just the free market. And that's what I still do to this day. I've always pretty much just ignored governments. Luckily, because I'm Canadian, I don't live in Canada anymore, and because of the way I've set up my citizenship, I really don't have to pay income tax anymore, which is very nice, I have to say. And so, yeah, but I respect those kind of people who are trying to fight the system as well. I think it's good to have everybody doing all kinds of things to fight these systems. And I know there's people like Mark Stevens and others. There's a Canadian guy named Clifford or something.
Clifford.
Yes, him. I just recently got turned on to him. Quite interesting. I didn't know anything about them, but I think it takes all types. So, was there anything else that you saw besides Stefan Molyneux's videos that kind of did you read any particular books or see any websites that you liked, or what helped you grow with your evolution?
Well, actually, no. I feel like I'm really fresh to this whole topic of voluntarism, which is probably why I find it so exciting. It's all kind of new to me. And when you invited me to come on your show, I said I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiastic promoter of freedom and liberty. And I've been running my YouTube channel and doing videos trying to promote these principles. But I always think that the truth is simple. These principles are simple. They're not rocket science, right? Nobody's got the right to force other people to do things they don't want to do. So I guess in a way, you kind of don't need to be an expert. You just need to kind of speak the truth. And that's all I've been trying to do, really.
Yeah, I agree. And And that's what I liked about you, is your enthusiasm. Believe me, after a few years of this, you'll become jaded like the rest of us, and you'll start to realize that it's not going to change in a matter of months or anything like that.
Right.
Although I'm probably one of the most optimistic out there. I think it's possible within the next 10 or 20 years to have some major changes in the world. But I've never heard anyone else say any number close to that. Stefan Molyneux says probably a century or two. Others even say as much as 1,000 years. But I'm quite optimistic, and I saw you recently posted on your Facebook page an interesting quote. You said that people who say that greed is bad have a lot of cognitive dissonance. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. It's always really annoyed me when people hold the belief that money is the problem, or people say greed has been the problem in the world. And I don't agree. I don't agree with that at all. I've always been very entrepreneurial and pro-market and pro-business, and to me, I can see very clearly that if you're doing business and providing a service, and customers are voluntarily, paying you money for a service, then there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with being ambitious, and nothing wrong with building wealth, so long as you're not forcing people to do things. Okay, so I really don't like it when people don't distinguish between voluntary and violent interactions, because when people complain about money and wealth and bankers and things, a lot of the time they're using examples of profit which are derived from violence, right? Such as government contractors that are being paid for money which was stolen, and that's not real, genuine example. So it's not business the problem, it's not ambition, it's not greed, it's not wealth that's the problem. It's the willingness to be violent that's the problem, and I like to keep banging that drum and promoting that message.
Yeah, it's amazing how people can't see it. I don't know if it's brainwashing or what it is, that it's such an obvious principle is just so unobvious to people. They'll so happily tell you right to their face, I support the drug war. But what they're saying is, I support people taking guns and putting people in cages for having dried flowers in their pocket that I, for whatever stupid reason, don't like. And they just don't see it. So that's the real dangerous thing about government, is it enables people to be violent without even knowing that they actually are being violent. And they actually think they're peaceful people, but all of their actions are actually violent.
I completely agree, Jeff. And what really annoys me, when people say that money is the problem and stuff, what annoys me is it's a waste of energy, because if we're going to be in this freedom movement and we're going to try and make the world a better place, it doesn't help to be focusing on the wrong problem. And so, and that's what bothers me about it. When people say is money that's the problem, it's a waste of energy. And if they just distinguish between voluntary profit and violent profit, then they'd really understand what the real problem is, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's sort of based, I don't know, Karl Marx, if there was one person I could have wished was never born, it's Karl Marx. His stupid ideas continue to pervade everybody, including a lot of my capitalist friends. I have multi-million dollar worth entrepreneurial friends who, when you start talking to them, they start actually spouting Marxist kind of stuff. It's really devious, this stuff, and it can really confuse people. And I think we're seeing that a lot. You talk to some of the people at Occupy Wall Street and that sort of thing, and they're very confused. Yeah. And they do have this feeling that greed is bad. And but if you just propose it how we were just saying, that you gave a great example. If someone's offering a service to somebody and that person wants it and they voluntarily give them money for it, then that's great. And that person, the best thing they could do is to offer that to as many people as possible who voluntarily want that. The more the better, because they're making more people happy. They're actually creating wealth, because in every transaction it's a win-win, unlike what the Marxist thinks. They think that every transaction is a win-lose, where the laborer, the people paying for the product, are losing at the expense of the evil, greedy capitalist. But there's no basis for that whatsoever. And like you said, people just get it all conflated, especially now in the US, where everything is so mixed. There's hardly any free market at all. So people look around and they say, oh, well, Halliburton and Blackwater and all these people are terrible. It's like, well, those are just a function of the state. They would not exist in a free market. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this kind of myth that that rich people, capitalists, kind of take the money from the poor people, which of course is not true at all. Customers voluntarily choose to pay money in exchange for some service or some product. So it's just not accurate at all to say that capitalists take money from people, right?
Yeah, and it's totally screwed up thinking too. And this is, this goes back to the fact that no one knows anything about true economics, that they think that if they give their money to a company which is owned by a rich person, that he's going to take that money, put it in a mattress somewhere, and now that money is not available to the rest of society, which is totally not the case. That money always gets reinvested into other things that people want, and all voluntarily, unless the government gets involved, and that's the problem. And people just need to, the people out there who actually believe that capitalism or free market transactions and greed are bad really need to think a little harder about what they're talking about and really realize that the problem is government and not free market transactions.
I completely agree. And I saw a great video earlier on. I forget which channel it was, but the guy was talking about sweatshops. And I won't try and remember what he said exactly, but maybe I'll send you the link. But he was saying how sweatshops, it's not forced labor, right? Nobody's being forced to work, and he was showing how the money they get paid is actually better than the other opportunities that are available. And of course, it's actually government borders that stops people moving to better conditions, and is law and commercial law and trade barriers and minimum wage laws that actually artificially spoils the natural equilibriums of the free market, right?
Absolutely. I was in Thailand. I used to live there, and my dad visited, and we'd drive by some shops, which looked like pretty bad working conditions, very hot, obviously, and a lot of people in there sewing, and he'd drive by, and he'd go, "That was a sweatshop." And I'd go, "Okay, you can call it a sweatshop, call it whatever you want, but what it really is people who are going there voluntarily to work, because obviously that's the better option than not going there for those people." And so I said to him, "Well, what should we do?" That very dangerous word, we. Well, we should do something. We should make a minimum wage. And, it goes back to the fact that no one knows anything about economics. Right. Minimum wage actually creates unemployment, because if those people in there are making 30 cents an hour and he wants it to go to $1 an hour, then that place closes and then no one has a job. And again, through violence. So he's actually saying, my own father, who is actually saying, let's take some guns, go in there and force them to pay these people more, which is despicable. But they don't really see it that way. And, I'm not putting down my own father or anything, but that's just the way that a lot of people see things. And it's too bad, because it's totally wrong-headed. And of course there's bad working conditions, but as long as it's all voluntary, that's fine. And people need to remember too that the Western world didn't exactly start with the greatest of working conditions, as you know, there in the UK during the Industrial Revolution. You had like 4-year-olds working in factories, which actually I think it's better for a young person to work in a factory than to go to these public education systems, indoctrination systems. But that's a whole other story. Yeah. But that's one question I did want to ask you, because I don't know a lot about the UK. I've been there, of course. I've been to London many times, but I don't have my finger on the pulse of what's going on there exactly. But I do see a lot of crazy stuff going on. Very 1984, video cameras on every street. For the Olympics now, there's surface-to-air missiles all over London. It seems like George Orwell's worst nightmare. Is that is that what's really going on over there?
Yeah, I guess it's pretty similar to America. I mean, England and America are really, not much different, and Canada, of course. It's all, in terms of the police state, it's all very similar. And when I was in my free man on the land phase about 3 years ago, I was learning about that fear. There's this theory that you should have the natural right to travel around, and you shouldn't need to have a license in order to drive a car, right? But the trouble is wishful thinking. There's a difference between an ideal world and reality. So I tested this out for myself, right? I was determined to prove that I could drive without a license plate and without a license and without insurance. So I tested it. So I drove through Bristol on a motorbike. And I got arrested and got charged and got fined and got put in prison and all the rest of it. And so, I mean, I just recorded a video just now, Jeff, and I was saying, from my point of view, it's the police that are actually our slave masters, really, because it's our friends and family and neighbors and relatives in the police, and they're the ones that actually enforce all this stuff, right? They're the ones that initiate violence. It's not some Rockefeller, Rothschild, banker that actually enforces it. It's regular men and women in the police that make it all happen. And so I really hold them responsible. I don't excuse it. I don't accept the excuse that they're just doing their job or just following orders or it's not their fault. I really hold them responsible for being the aggressors.
Yeah, me too. I'm not a big fan of the police at all. I wouldn't mind there being some sort of police service, but I'd like it to be voluntary. I'd like there to be options. Anything to do with government is always a disaster. I just actually recently wrote about the riots up in Vancouver, where I used to live for a while, and the police pretty much just let the riots go on for a while. And there's actually proof in Canada of a few different riots where the police started the riot, because that just gets them more funding. It's the exact opposite of what happens in private enterprise. In private enterprise, if they really screw up, they get fired, and that's it. They're done. Or they may even be liable. They might even have to pay back whatever the costs were. Whereas in the world of government, the worse you are, the more money you get, because it's always, oh, well, they failed, so they must need more money. So that's how the incentive structure is in government, and it's ridiculous. Government truly is just communism at its most basic root. It's central planning. And for people who actually think that they don't like communism, they look at Russia or Soviet Union or China and say, yeah, I don't like communism at all. Well, we're living in a very communist world, a centrally planned world, where just a number of people, whoever they are, whether we elect them or whether they're there as dictators or whatever, they just decide a lot of the things that we are supposed to do, and that's centrally planning, and it destroys a lot of stuff. And the more that we can allow the free market to prevail, the more peace and prosperity we'll definitely have.
I completely agree, and the government doesn't have to do a good job because it doesn't have to compete and it doesn't have to make a profit, right? And it always makes me laugh. Like, if you walk through town, you can always tell a project or a building project there's been, or a cafe or a restaurant or something. You can tell when it's been done by the government. You can tell when it's not done by an entrepreneur. You can see when something is not making a profit and yet it's being funded anyway, kind of thing. It's patently obvious, right? The difference.
Yeah, I was just walking through downtown Vancouver, and I noticed that Canada is very socialist. A lot of people may not know that, but it really is. And I was walking down, and I noticed the size of the post office building. Now, the post office is pretty much an artifact. There's no need for it at all anymore. All they do is deliver brochures and junk mail at this point. The size of the building in downtown Vancouver, it was like a complete block. It must have been a few square miles in circumference. It was just massive. Right beside that was the CBC building, and of course that's the Canadian government broadcasting propaganda channel. Massive building. And I actually went inside. They actually interviewed me, if you can believe it or not. I don't know if it'll ever make it onto air after what I said, but we were walking through, it's just labyrinths. Because they have no profit motive, and there's no one there who needs to say, hey, let's cut this, or let's sell part of the building because we're not using it, because we're wasting money. In government, you want to waste money, and you want things to be like that. And people just need to realize that and get out of this mode. Government is unnatural. There should be no such thing as a government on earth. It's completely artificial. People almost think of it as something that just has to be there. They keep repeating that horrible phrase, there's two things in life that are for sure, death and taxes. Well, one of them's for sure, death. Taxes is not for sure. That's actually a propaganda thing that they keep saying, so people get the feeling that they're here forever, and this is just a normal part of life, is to have these overseers, basically a big gang of violent people who tell everyone what to do. And the fact that people can't see that is disturbing. But hopefully, with more people like yourself doing more videos and getting the word out there, we can help to wake up some people.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jet. I see it as a challenge, and I see it as a quite exciting challenge to try and spread this message and try and wake people up. And we've got the internet, which is amazing because, no other previous empire in history, this is the first time all the people can communicate with each other like this. I'm kind of stating the obvious, but I know Steph that says that it's going to take multi-generations, and that's probably right, but I'm sure as hell going to try my best to to push this message, as fast and as hard as we can, and see if we can bring it about as quickly as possible.
That's great, and I think you're doing a good job. So why don't you tell people where they can get your videos or your website or whatever else you have?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my website is just benlowrey.com. That's BenLowrey.com. And my YouTube channel is Ben Lowrey himself. And I do regular video blogs and stuff. And I interview people from time to time, And I really appreciate what you're doing as well. I think you're doing a great job with Anarchast.com. It's really great.
Well, thank you very much, and I think you are as well. So keep up the great work, and thanks for being on with us. It's Ben Lowrey out of Bristol, UK. This has been Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.